Pleasure.
With more on the crash, I'm going to bring in my panel of experts from military to aviation to terrorism analysts. With me now, retired Air Force Lieutenant General Tom McInerney, terrorism expert Sebastian Gorka, and a former commercial pilot, JP Tristani. Welcome to you all. Sebastian, if it were terrorism, wouldn't one of the groups who did it be bragging about it? I mean, destruction and the press of destruction seem to go hand in hand for these terrorist groups.
No, not necessarily so. It's very strange. If you look at jihadi groups, they're very different from the political terrorists of the 20th century. Groups like the IRA or Rota Army Faction would indeed almost immediately claim responsibility. But what we've seen with Al-Qaeda and even with ISIS is there is a kind of pregnant pause. There is a delay very often until they actually accept responsibility. We don't exactly know why. It could be a question of measuring the response and getting to a point of crescendo where they can have the mass effect of accepting that responsibility after so many people want to know who's behind it. So if this was a terrorist attack, it is not unusual for jihadi groups to wait some time until they claim responsibility.
Sebastian, sadly, that does make sense, and I'm glad you brought those points up. Lieutenant General, Egypt will have primary responsibility for conducting the probe, but as my colleague Ashley Webster said, the French government is involved, the planes manufacturer, Greece is involved. I know French investigators are actually looking through surveillance footage at the Paris airport, but how long before we can complete the puzzle?
Well, it's going to take quite a bit of time, Deirdre, but here's my assessment. I believe it was clearly a bomb put in the tail, very similar to the Russian aircraft last October. I believe it's a cookie cutter. I had unconfirmed reports that it was Islamic State Amaq agency, but I haven't confirmed that yet. But the fact is when you look at what happened, that airplane had a catastrophic explosion at flight level 370, 37,000. In my 35 years in the Air Force, flying airplanes with bombs, ammunition, etc., we never had an airplane at altitude explode catastrophically like that. Now, I'm not saying that it couldn't happen, but I think the patterns of behavior that we're looking at, what went on in Baghdad yesterday with ISIS, this is a direct impact on President al-Sisi and on the Egyptian government. And I believe when that tail came off, that's why that airplane rotated. The model that you showed before had a tail on it. I believe that violent spinning that it got into and turning was driven by an airplane without a tail. The pilots were so overcome with this catastrophic event, they did not have time to put out a Mayday signal. So all this fits in the patterns of behavior that I think are reasonable.
Okay, Lieutenant General, makes sense. I'm going to bring in one of your former, I should say, colleagues in the sky, commercial pilot, JP Tristani. So, JP, you heard what the Lieutenant Colonel said. Does that make sense to you, first and foremost?
Only partially. That's a nice animation, but I'm not so sure. And I could get one answer very quickly, that was an intact aircraft coming down, whether the tail was off or not. I agree that a catastrophic event occurred. That could have been an explosive decompression that was so violent that it structurally damaged the aircraft and broke it apart and came down. Or that catastrophic event was caused by a bomb that went off in the aircraft. Now, the answer that I would like to hear is that they have a radar return from 37,000 feet down to 10,000 feet where they say the radar return departed. What radar return? Was it the radar return from the transponder in the aircraft that was replying to ATC interrogation? Or was it debris coming down in pieces where primary radar, which is merely a scan and a reflective bounce back that tells me that there are pieces of an aircraft coming down? Now, all the Egyptian authorities have to tell me is, where did that radar return come from? Are you getting it from a transponder the secondary radar, or are you getting it from a primary?
And that would confirm to you personally whether this was a bomb was planted on the plane.
It would
or not.
enhance the fact that probably the destructive force of a bomb at 37,000 feet with a fully pressurized aircraft is a multiple effect and far more damaging than just an explosive decompression, which we have had, and aircraft frames have survived. But the combination of for instance, the Buk missile strike of the Malaysian aircraft over the Ukraine was a double hit. You had a proximity fuse of a missile that hit an aircraft, and the aircraft both exploded from that and the amount of pressurization of that aircraft.
Lieutenant General, I want to bring you back in because to JP's point, as far as the plane itself goes, that's what I want to delve into. The A320 is a commercial, I mean, it's not a jet fighter, right? It is not meant to turn on a dime. I mean, this is sort of like a Cadillac in the sky kind of model, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in that sense, the idea that it was a very quick turn, at least to stand out from normal patterns. Sebastian, in the 2 days before the disappearance of this plane, the plane had been in numerous other places. So Brussels, Tunis, Eritrea, and that was all before Paris. So can you draw any conclusions? I realize that's highly speculative just by picking out places on the map. But I mean, that plane was in numerous places before it even left Paris. So tons of opportunities for bad actors, right?
Correct. It is not unusual for the EgyptAir flight manifest to visit this many airports in North Africa and Europe and the Middle East in that short span of time. But look at the list. It's not just places like Brussels or Luxor. It's places like Eritrea as well. And these include airports that simply do not have the level of security when it comes to the vetting of ground staff that we have in other Western airports. Even in Western airports, we have problems. Look at the fact that we recently had a case in the United States of an individual who went to fight with ISIS, who was from Minnesota, and he used to work at an airport in Minnesota cleaning the airframe. So this is the real black hole.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Sebastian. I remember that too, which is leading to some to speculate that this is truly an inside job.
Yes, this is a huge issue. We have all kinds of federal intelligence vetting services and centers that go through the manifests of passengers in the United States or passengers on international commercial vessels coming to the United States from OCONUS, from outside the continental United States. But we do not have that visibility on the staff who have access to planes on the ground in the airports around the world. We know this is a huge issue in Paris. One of my sources says it is a very serious possibility that this actually occurred in Egypt. If this was a terrorist incident, the likelihood of an insider actor doing this on the tarmac in Egypt is very, very high. Before the plane left Egypt to come back, it could have actually been put on the airframe at that point.